into this house to worship him. We have come into this house to worship him. We have come into this house to worship him. We have to worship him and magnify. 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 Amen. Your name. We have come into this house to give him praise. Give him praise. We have come into this house. Give him praise. Give him praise. We have come into this house to give him praise. Give him praise. We have come into this house to give him praise. Give him praise. And magnify. Oh, yeah. Hey, and magnify. And magnify. Jordan. We come to worship. We come to worship. We come to glorify your name. We come to worship. We come to worship. We come to glorify. We come to glorify your name. Say worship. Worship. Say worship. Worship. Say worship. Worship. Anybody come to worship? Worship. Say glorify. 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 I'm gonna glorify. 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 Magnify. 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 I'm gonna magnify. I'm gonna lift him high. Lift him high. Lift him high. Lift him high. I'll say thank you, Lord. Thank you, Lord. I'll say thank you, Lord. Say thank you, Lord. Say yeah. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yes, yes, yeah. I know he is. I know he is. I know he is. Oh, yes, he's real. Say yes. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yes. Say yes. Say yes. Say yes. Say yes. Say yes. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yes, he's real. I know he is. I know he is. Know he is. Yes, he's real. Say thank you, Lord. 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 I'm gonna magnify. I'm gonna magnify. I'm gonna magnify. I'm gonna magnify. I'm gonna glorify. Glorify. I'm gonna glorify. I'm gonna glorify. Let's lift him high. Let's lift him high. Let's lift him high. And magnify. And magnify. Hey. And magnify. Hey. Anybody gonna magnify? And magnify. Listen. And magnify. And magnify. Jordan. book of Micah, chapter 6. Brother Miller, that's just the song I needed to hear. I needed to hear that this morning. You know, sometimes you don't want to go. But I told the Lord I'd go. No turning back. It's all right, take your time. As we overhear what God has to say this week, let's look at Micah chapter 6, verse 8. And it reads like this: He has told you, O man, what is good, and what does the Lord require of thee? But to do justice, and to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God. This is the word of God. You may be seated. I want to label the message this morning, The Thunder of Bare Feet. The thunder of bare feet. Regardless of where you stand ideologically, politically, or religiously, the events of this week have been deeply unsettling. With each passing day, our country has experienced tragedy after tragedy, with the despair and nihilism of the populace increasing with each news report. It's been a sad week. It's been a disillusioning week. It's been a week that has caused the entire country and even other parts of the Western world to stop and ponder what is a plausible way forward. And even if that's a possibility, or are we barreling towards some unthinkable and unpreventable war between races and political ideologies? Heartbreak is ubiquitous this week, but possibly the most heartbreaking reality is that even in the face of unspeakable tragedy, our country still has not managed to come together. In the face of widespread upheaval, citizens of this nation still refuse to see each other as brothers and sisters. In the face of Although we know the consequences of hate and oppression, our populace and policymakers refuse to deal with the systemic injustices that create environments of tension. And the truth is, church, I wish that I could in good conscience tell you that everything is going to be all right. I wish that I could give you some optimistic opiate that would assuage fears and assure you that the worst is behind us. But the truth is, I can't. I'm a preacher, not a politician. I read the signs of the time. I don't read the wavering opinions of political polls. And the truth is that people are sick and tired of being sick and tired. The ambition of 12 police officers in Dallas, Texas has rightly outraged Americans from the Atlantic to the Pacific. I must admit that I wept as I watched the live coverage of the Dallas ambush. On Thursday night, I could barely get to sleep as it appeared that a prominent city in our nation had quickly condescended into a war zone. Then on Friday, a police officer in Ballou, Missouri, and then another officer in Louisiana were wounded by civilian fire. And under normal circumstances, a hush would have come over the nation. If it were the 1960s, Dr. King and SCLC would have called a moratorium on all protesting, but that's not what happened. In cities from Boston to Atlanta to Phoenix to Nashville, Tennessee, thousands upon thousands of people took to the street and began to protest against an unjust system that continues to treat black and brown bodies as though they are nothing. I expected that on Friday we would hear a sacred hush.
as people would begin to lift up prayers unto God. I thought that people would light candles and hold hands and sing Kumbaya, but that's not the sound that I heard. No, it was not a sound of a peaceful tranquility, but rather it was the sound of thunder. It was the thunder of the barefooted ones. The barefooted ones are those whom have been stripped down of all of their basic rights. The barefooted ones are those who feel that though they raise their voices, that they have no voices. The barefooted ones are those whom have been told if you pull up your pants and say yes ma'am and yes sir, that people will respect you and see you as a human being. The barefooted ones are those who are told if you get your education and you act like you have some sense, that you'll be able to make it through a basic traffic stop. But the barefooted ones have found out that you can do all of that. Your body can be rendered lifeless. And now the barefooted ones have created thunder. There's a thunder that is rattling the nation. There is not a word of comfort for a season as this. There is not a word that will assuage fears at this particular juncture. The other night, I had put Zoe to bed and I had fallen asleep. And I woke up somewhere around midnight. I had a hankering for Ben & Jerry's ice cream. Went to the kitchen, got some Ben & Jerry's out of the freezer, went back into my room. As I ate my Ben & Jerry's, I turned on the television. And I saw the news reports that policemen in Dallas, Texas were under attack. I had been watching the news all week, and admittedly, I had committed to not changing my sermon. I wasn't going to change my sermon on Wednesday evening because I said I'm tired of preaching about black men dying. I wasn't going to change my sermon Thursday because I said I don't have anything new to say as it relates to black and brown people being murdered on video camera and getting off without as much as a slap on the wrist. I didn't have anything new to say. But then Thursday night came. And I said, I guess I've got to say something that will speak to this moment. I began to pray. I began to flip through my Bible and try to find a comforting word for people through this season. I read Psalm 37, fret not thyself because of evildoers. I read Habakkuk where he says, oh Lord, how long? When will you hear our cry? I read the 23rd Psalm, the Lord is your shepherd. I shall not want. I said, Lord, what do you want me to say to your people? Which one of these passages do you want me to lift up on Sunday morning? And he said, don't lift up any of them. This is not a time for comfort. He said that's what's wrong with the modern church anyways. They have been too comfortable for too long. They won't stand up for the oppressed unless they're the ones that have been oppressed. They don't need to be comforted. It's time for them to be afflicted. Tell them that there is no word of comfort for a season like this week. God is not interested in hearing our prayers. He is not interested in our calls for him to come and make our streets safe. God is not interested in us holding any more prayer vigils. God said very clearly, I have already given you the pattern for dealing with the thunder of bare feet. Do justice. Love mercy. Walk humbly with God. that if you want the upheaval that is happening nationally to cease, it will not come as a consequence of your prayers. It'll come as a consequence of your actions. So today we are rightly outraged. Those 5 police officers who were murdered on Thursday night. But before we mourn their deaths, you need to analyze what created the environment that brought about their deaths. They were murdered by an African American young man who was 25 years old. And he was of the generation that is the most exposed generation that has ever lived of black folk. My generation is the most educated generation of African Americans. My generation of African Americans is we are the most, we have gone to more places, we've had access to more money, we have had more opportunity than any other generation of black folk that have ever lived. And yet we found out it doesn't mean a thing. It don't matter how much money you have, what school you went to, or where you grew up. When you are seen by some people, you still are nothing but a nigger. And they'll put a bullet in you and treat you like one. And before we mourn those 5 officers, you ensure that you talk about that 25-year-old young African American man who served this country in the United States military and was honorably discharged because he had mental health issues. And before we light a candle for those officers, you make sure you hold accountable every public official who has refused to give veterans the resources that they need for health and mental health care. Before we can mourn those officers, we had better hold accountable every public official who refuses to pass legislation for gun reform. He should have never been able to get that type of weaponry as a normal citizen. But we created that. Before you mourn those 5 officers, you mourn the system that created a young man who had been so overcome by nihilism that he said, all I want to do is shoot white police officers. Before you mourn those deaths, don't you dare call those 5 officers' name before you call the name of Alton Sterling. Don't call their names before you call the name Philando Castile. Don't call their names before you call Tamir Rice and Freddie Gray and Mike Brown. You better make sure that you give analysis to what created this. And now we hear thunder. This is not the civil rights era. This is the Black Lives Matter era. And I'm going to be honest with you, the Black Lives Matter, they don't respect me. They don't care a hill of beans about what I have to say. You know why? Because I have a REV dot before my name. And the Black Lives Matter crowd has said that the black church has failed. So we're not going to sing no hymns. We're not going to pray no prayers. We're not going to clean up our language so that you can be respected by us. We're going to get our rights by any means necessary. It's the thunder of bare feet. The church can be passive if we want to. But the church is guilty of being a disappointment. Over the past 30 years, we refused to be headlights and we became taillights. And as a consequence, It's thundering. Whenever you hear thunder, it is a sign that something more severe is on the way. If we're going to deal with the thunder of bare feet, there are some things that America had better rethink. Do justice. Love mercy. Walk humbly with God. America has an interesting way of finding money to fight wars across seas that we often never win, but we cannot educate our own children here. Here in the city of Louisville, Kentucky, we have homeless children who cannot get a meal at night. But we find money to make downtown and the water system pretty. We find money to connect all of the parks around Louisville. We find money for whatever we want to find money for. Why can't we find money to go down in the West End and take those houses that are boarded up and make those into affordable living homes? We better rethink some things. We better rethink the way that we are doing democracy. We better rethink the way that we are meting out justice. When a black man can go to jail for having a dime bag in his pocket, but a police officer who pulls that black man to the side can shoot him dead without a weapon, and he walk free and receive paid administrative leave. We better rethink some things. We thought Donald Trump was funny in the early days of his presidency, but it ain't funny no more. That type of hatred and vitriolic speech that comes over the airways is poisonous to the body politic. We better rethink some things. Black folk, our ancestors, paid with their blood for the right to vote. Fought for the opportunity to be legal, entire citizens of this democracy, and we won't take our trifling tails to vote. We had better rethink some things. It doesn't make any sense that we voted in a governor as tyrannical as ours, with 30% of the eligible voters casting their ballot. There's something wrong with us. We had better rethink. Better rethink some things. Because it could be that we are responsible for our own downward spiral. Better rethink some things. We better reclaim some things. Do justice. Love mercy. Walk humbly with God. That doesn't need much interpretation. It simply means that if you murder someone, that you should be tried. That you should be put in handcuffs, placed in the back of a police car, and taken downtown and booked. It simply means that you are innocent until proven guilty. Do justice. Love mercy. Walk humbly with God. America was founded in 1776 by a group of escapees and thieves. They escaped from Europe in order to flee persecution. They came to the America, stole the land of the Native Americans, killed them on their land, drove them off of their land, placed them who survived on reservations, and then they proceeded to set up the same system that they ran away from. They kidnapped millions of Africans from the shores of Africa, put them on ships like cargo, brought them across the ocean, and caused them to live under enforced labor for 400 years. We celebrated that the other day on 4th of July. We had barbecue and we popped fireworks as we celebrated thieves and escapees. Now, we won't celebrate Juneteenth. We want to get rid of Black History Month. But we don't never fail to commemorate 4th of July. But you know, there's good in the worst of us. And there's bad in the best of us. Those thieving escapees managed to write a Declaration of Independence in which they wrote all men and all women are created equal. Now, they've struggled to live up to it for 400 plus years, but it's still there. And the beautiful thing about lofty values is that you always have the opportunity to grow into them. And if America is going to embrace our loftiest values, we must begin to rid ourselves of the systems that cause humanity to always be rendered unequal. For the past 400 plus years, America has constantly had a system of enslavement. For 400 years, black people were enslaved, forced servitude. And in 1865, Abraham Lincoln fired the slaves when he signed his Emancipation Proclamation. I say that they were fired, not freed, because there was no system set up to welcome these newly freed human beings into society. As a consequence, they moved from one form of slavery to another form of slavery. It was called sharecropping. From that, we went into a season of Jim Crow segregation in which your grandmothers were, and my grandmother was maids, and your grandfathers and my grandfathers were nothing but brick masons, and they were paid pennies on the dollar for what they were worth. And then after we got through the Jim Crow era, we began to erect prisons all over the country where black men were then warehoused. Now, you didn't think that your brother, your son, your husband was just being stored in a prison without any type of capitalistic gain. Did you know that when brothers go to jail that they are worth $30,000 per year for the owner of the prison, but once they are released they can't even get a job for $30,000? Now, if that ain't slavery, tell me what is. Then we place payday loan institutions in our urban cities where black people just like you and me go because they're trying to keep up, and instead of being able to keep up or get ahead, they find themselves in a deeper hole of debt. And you know the Bible says that the debtor is a slave to the lender. So as long as you're in debt, you ain't nothing but a slave. And let's just be honest, black folk don't have no money, so we're still enslaved. We better reclaim our highest virtues. We better be serious about paying women equal pay as their male counterparts. We'd better reclaim some things. We'd better be very vigilant that all of our school systems, all of our schools are equal. We ought not have schools that are better because of the tax bracket that they are in, because of the homes around them. We had better rethink some things. Then we had better recommit. Do justice. That's the bottom line. Love mercy. That's the bottom line. Walk humbly with God. Doing justice just means that if the laws apply to one segment of the population, that they should apply to the entire population. I'm not anti-police. We need police, and we need good police, but we need fair police. We need to do justice. We need to love mercy. That simply means love, creating some space for people to mess up, serve their time, and get it right. After a person serves their time in federal prison, they ought to be able to come out and resume life They ought to be able to vote. They ought to be able to get a job. That they ought not have to walk around with a big F on their foreheads. Love mercy and walk humbly with God. I don't know that America has ever been a Christian nation. I know that it gets beside people when that statement is made, but anytime at the birth of a nation, people can enslave other people, can treat other people as less than human beings, and then write in their founding documents that they are 3/4 of a human being. Can't be a Christian nation. Can't be a Christian nation. Our nation has just been guilty of using Christian nomenclature to baptize our dirty deeds. So we went and colonialized other nations and called it missionary work. In order to form an us against them in our body politic, we have individuals who will literally fight for the rights of unborn infants, but will then stand in the way for those young infants to be fed once they are born. I don't know if we're a Christian nation. When people who occupy the highest roles of leadership in the Southern Baptist Convention also hold memberships in the National Rifle Association, I'm not sure how much of a Christian nation this is. Yes, we bow our heads in front of our capitals and ask for God to bless America, but it is nothing more than a charade. Every time we inaugurate a president, we have them to place his hand on the Bible, but they never are challenged to open the Bible and read where Jesus says, whatever you do to the least of these, you have done it unto me. And America had better be mindful that God does not love us any more than he loves anybody else. No, American exceptionalism is a myth. God does not love us any more than he loves anyone else. That God does not love Americans any more than he loves Asians. That God does not love people who are in the Midwest any more than he loves people who are in the heart of sub-Saharan Africa. God loves the entire world. And if you don't believe me, read your Bible. It says the earth is the Lord's, the fullness thereof, the world and they that dwell therein. And if America is going to deal with the thunder of bare feet, we had better remember that the same way that he allowed the Roman Empire to rise, he'll allow the American Empire to rise and fall. The same way he allowed the Byzantine Empire to rise and fall, he'll allow the same thing to happen to us. So we had better be humble. We had better walk humbly with God. We had better be serious about the fact that we need God to help us with some very serious issues in our nation. We had better walk humbly with God, asking God to lead us as to who will be the next president of this great nation, and asking God that his will would be done on earth as it is in heaven. We had better walk humbly with God. We better realize that God is not duty bound to bless us. God can bless whomever he wants to bless. We just need to be thankful that he allows the rain to fall on the just and the sun to rise on the unjust. Equally, we need to just be thankful that every now and then God looks in our direction. We'd better walk humbly with God. We had better silence hate-filled speech. We better be careful how we treat lesbian and gay people. For it could be that they are the people that God is overlooking the banisters of glory to see how we'll care for them. We better be careful. When we see people go through terrible tragedy and claiming that it is the vengeance of God because they don't fit into what we understand as proper religiosity, we had better walk humbly with God. To walk humbly with God is to be grateful that God chooses to deal with you. To walk humbly with God is to be honored that God will hear your prayer, because the reality is that none of us are worthy for God to ever deal with, for the fact that he loves us with all of our stuff, that he woke us up this morning and started us on our way and gave us energy and cognitive ability is blessing enough. Somebody ought to give God praise just for the fact that he chose us to save you and fill you and bless your life. We had better walk humbly with God. I leave you with the words of Jesus when he showed up to that home with locked doors. Behold, I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hear my voice and harden not your heart and open the door, I will come into you. I will sup with you, and you with me. Christ is knocking on America's door. If we let him in and take him seriously, we may be able to avoid the impending storm. But if we continue to be recalcitrant, the thunder of bare feet is nothing more than a sign of something more sinister to come. And it could be that we'll drown under the deluge of refusing to heed the thunder of bare feet. May it be so. May we be serious. May we be prayerful. Amen.